Now, the High Court in Belfast has ruled that Northern Ireland's abortion laws breach human rights. The case was brought by a woman who was told by doctors that her unborn child would not survive outside the womb, but was denied a legal termination. There's a near total ban on abortion in Northern Ireland, but the law is set to change later this month, as our Ireland correspondent Emma Vardy tells us.
Sarah Ewart became the public face of a debate about a deeply personal issue. 6 years ago, she travelled to London from her home in Northern Ireland to have an abortion. Her unborn baby had a condition that meant the child couldn't survive outside the womb.
It's not something that would have ever even dreamt of. I'd rather have the memory of seeing it move on screen and hearing a heartbeat and see the end.
She allowed her experience to be filmed because she believed Northern Ireland's near total ban on abortion was wrong. Today, Belfast High Court ruled that Northern Ireland's abortion laws had led to a breach of her human rights.
It's a massive relief that we've actually heard today. The judges recognised that we did have the standing and that my human rights were breached.
While opinion polls suggest a majority of people in Northern Ireland are in favour of changing the law, there remains strong support for campaign groups who argue an unborn child's right to life should be protected.
For the people of Northern Ireland, it's a very sad day for the future unborn children with special needs, when a court would make a decision to deny the very personhood and deny the rights to life of unborn children here.
Marking the strength of opposition, thousands marched on Stormont recently to protest against legislation passed by Westminster in July, which means the law on terminations is set to be relaxed. The change will come in if Northern Ireland's devolved government at Stormont, which collapsed 2.5 years ago, isn't restored in the next few weeks. Women in Northern Ireland have been able to access free abortions by travelling to England since 2017. Although the law is set to change in 18 days' time, it's likely services won't be set up locally until the spring. At the moment, more than 1,000 women a year, for a multitude of reasons, leave Northern Ireland to seek an abortion elsewhere. And today's ruling is another mark of the change taking place in what was a very socially conservative Northern Ireland. Access to abortion remains one of the most divisive issues here, but it's now on the brink of change, decades after the rest of the UK. Emma Vardy, BBC News, Belfast.
For the latest there in Doha, and that's it. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.
Hello there, good evening, welcome to the programme. In what's being described as a landmark ruling, the High Court in Belfast has ruled that Northern Ireland's abortion law breaches the UK's human rights commitments. The case was taken by Sarah Ewart, who 6 years ago travelled to England for a termination after doctors here said the fetus wouldn't survive after birth. The judge said she ruled in Mrs Ewart's favour, as it wasn't right to ask another woman to relive the trauma she had experienced. Our health correspondent Mary-Louise Connolly reports.
It's been a long and difficult road for Sarah Ewart, but today the verdict went in her favour. Flanked by what she described as her team, she said she's glad she persevered.
I did it for myself and all the other women and people who are going to be affected by this. By no means am I saying that everybody that finds themselves in this position has to go through a medical procedure, but what I'm saying is people that don't want to continue with the pregnancy need to have that option there. It's a very difficult thing. It's not something we just wake up and want. This was a very much wanted pregnancy and a very difficult decision to make. It's been that long. Like, I just can't believe we're finally here at the day where we've been told that yes, I did have standing and yes, your human rights were breached. It's a really good feeling. I'm just so glad and relieved that we're going to get the help.
The ruling confirms that Northern Ireland's abortion law is incompatible with the UK's human rights obligations in cases of fatal abnormality, but not everyone's happy.
Well, I think it's a very sad day for the people of Northern Ireland. It's a very sad day for the future unborn children with special needs, when a court would make a decision to deny the very personhood and deny the rights to life of unborn children here in Northern Ireland.
Sarah Ewart went public after being told she couldn't have a legal abortion when doctors said her fetus wouldn't survive outside the womb. She travelled to England for a termination. Her story humanised the legally and politically burdened abortion issue in Northern Ireland, which ended today at Belfast's High Court. Ruling in Sarah Ewart's favour, Mrs Justice Keegan said that it wasn't right to expect another woman to relive the same trauma. The judge also said that Sarah Ewart had been affected by the current law, that she had provided a compelling personal testimony and that she did qualify as a victim. Currently, a termination is only permitted here if a woman's life is at risk or if there's a risk of permanent and serious damage to her mental or physical health.
It's time we had free, safe, legal and local abortion services, but today is a huge win for human rights and a huge win for all women who have been long harmed by our discriminatory and archaic laws.
Very proud of her, very hard journey.
Mrs Justice Keegan said she would hold off making a more formal declaration in light of impending legislation which will decriminalise abortion here on October 22nd. Meanwhile, for the woman who triggered all of this, at least for today, she's putting the judicial system behind her. Mary-Louise Connolly, BBC Newsline.
Thousands of people on both sides of the abortion debate have taken to the streets of Belfast ahead of the decriminalisation of abortion in Northern Ireland next month. The Westminster Parliament has passed a law that will trigger the move unless power sharing at Stormont is restored within weeks.
Pro-choice demonstrators setting off on the afternoon's first march organised by the Rally for Choice coalition, supported by student unions, trade unions and groups from throughout the North and the Republic. They threaded their way through the city centre, rejoicing at Westminster's decision during the summer to decriminalise abortion here in the absence of an executive. A move which one speaker said put their side of the abortion debate here in its strongest position ever. However, their main speaker, a former Westminster MP, cautioned that the dissolution of the British Parliament within the next 6 weeks could do away with the proposed reform.
My concern is, with all the other madness in Westminster, that we'll end up with a general election after which this pledge will not be honoured unless we have a Labour government.
But the much larger March for Their Lives protest was told that the calling of a British general election would not in any way hinder the decriminalisation of abortion here.
And the reason it won't is that the Act has been passed, and the Act says that criminalisation of abortion is repealed from the 22nd of October. So from the 22nd of October, there can be no criminal act committed by any person who aborts a baby, no matter what the circumstances, up to 28 weeks.
There were no official estimates of the turnouts. Today's rallies follow last evening's large, silent anti-abortion vigil outside Stormont's Parliament buildings, which was attended by the leader of the DUP, Arlene Foster, and the leader of the Ulster Unionists, Robin Swan. Joe Little, RTE News, Belfast.
Church leaders in Northern Ireland have called for fresh impetus to restore power sharing at Stormont to avoid the introduction of abortion services there, which mirror those in the rest of the UK. Leaders of the Church of Ireland, Methodist, Presbyterian and Roman Catholic traditions say they want local politicians to resolve what they say are challenging issues.
Stormont has been closed for almost 3 years after a row between Sinn Féin and the DUP collapsed the government here. The Brexit problem has made the task of restoring power sharing even more difficult. But another issue has now brought devolved government into focus again. Several thousand people recently gathered on the Stormont estate to raise their concerns about pending abortion legislation. Unless devolved government is restored in Northern Ireland by October the 21st, provisions passed in Westminster will be on course to be introduced here. Today, Protestant and Catholic Church leaders called on Northern Ireland's politicians to intervene.
The parties need to set aside their red lines, stop this silly debate about the Irish language, bring that in and move on to deal with this abortion issue for the sake of those who don't have the voice, the unborn children of our country.
Abortion will be legal in Northern Ireland from midnight tonight, following a change in the law passed at Westminster earlier this year. There was a late attempt to block the legislation at the Northern Ireland Assembly in Stormont, which was sitting for the first time in nearly 3 years to hear arguments. But that attempt by unionists was never likely to succeed, and a bad-tempered debate was followed by a walkout. Our Ireland correspondent Emma Vardy has more.
Their call has been heard. At midnight tonight, a law passed by MPs in Westminster will take effect, overturning Northern Ireland's near-total ban on abortion and legalising same-sex marriage.
Finally, our rights and our healthcare are being brought into the 21st century. This has been a long time coming.
Thousands of women in Northern Ireland have campaigned for this change. Abortion has been illegal even in cases of rape. Denise was unable to terminate her pregnancy after she was told her baby had a fatal condition and was likely to die in the womb.
When you get that news, it hits you like a bus. You just can't believe what you're hearing. I was too sick to travel, which left me with the experience of just being trapped in Northern Ireland in the most vulnerable state of being pregnant with a child that was going to die.
Having been through that experience, what does this mean to you today?
It's a victory for women's rights, and it's a time of celebration on that cause, but it's also a time to remember the many victims of Northern Ireland's barbaric and cruel laws.
We pray for that you will turn around and bring your presence.
The change in the law is extremely contentious, vehemently opposed by a number of Northern Ireland's religious and anti-abortion groups.
This is an imposition from Westminster. It's not wanted in Northern Ireland. This is an historic day. It's a day whenever the people of Northern Ireland will have to face the reality that abortion has been forced on us against our will.
To consider a private member's bill on the defence of the unborn child.
Inside, an attempt led by the Democratic Unionist Party to thwart the change. Sinn Féin refused to take part, calling it a cynical political stunt. And less than an hour after they arrived, the DUP walked out.
It is a very sad day, and I know some people will seek to celebrate today. And I would say to those people, think of those of us who are sad today and who believe that this is an affront to human dignity and to human life.
What do we want? Equal marriage!
And another big moment. From tonight, same-sex couples in Northern Ireland will be able to marry. There will be many people who celebrate what is a significant moment of social change here today. But on all sides of this debate, there is resentment and frustration that it was Westminster that intervened, and that Northern Ireland is still without a functioning assembly for local people to take these historic decisions themselves. Emma Vardy, BBC News, Belfast.
From midnight, abortion will be decriminalised and same-sex couples will be permitted to marry in Northern Ireland. Westminster voted to amend the law on both matters, saying the changes would only happen if there was no devolution. Nearly 3 years since its collapse, the Assembly was recalled today, and there was a last-ditch attempt to stop the relaxation of the abortion rules. But Sinn Féin and the Alliance Party didn't attend. Our political correspondent Gareth Gordon reports on today's developments.
These people had waited years for abortion reform. Now there were only hours to go. But wait. The DUP and others had a different idea.
A number of members have indicated to me that they wish to table a motion that the standing orders be suspended today for the purpose of allowing the Assembly to consider a private member's bill on the defence of the unborn child.
There followed high drama. The Speaker, a member of the DUP of course, argued there could be no business done without the election of a new Speaker by a cross-community vote, and his party leader argued he was wrong.
This is not a normal sitting of the Assembly. This is a sitting to deal with some of the most fundamental issues that can affect our society today. And I implore you to take an adjournment to allow us to have that legal advice so that we can have that equality of arms. And I have to say as well, to say that you have taken the breadth of legal advice and that you're satisfied with that legal advice, whilst not acknowledging the fact that the Attorney-General has given different legal advice, is not the right route to go down.
Other DUP members weighed in too.
Members opposite have indicated they are not supporting the election of a Speaker. Therefore, based on your decision, we are handcuffed, and you're handcuffing the Assembly.
He was talking about the SDLP, who made their point and then left.
We will not participate in this stunt any longer, and we will be not providing cross-community support for the election of Speaker. Thank you.
And with that went any chance of stopping these abortion reforms.
Until this day in Northern Ireland, the safest place for an unborn child was in the sanctuary of its mother's womb. Sadly, from tonight, the most dangerous place for some unborn will be in the mother's womb.
Outside, the parties who boycotted had their say.
I wish that the DUP and others put as much creativity into actually trying to make Power Sharing work as they have done today to try and attempt to deny people their rights, because that's what today was about.
What we have seen so far has actually been a complete and utter disgrace.
All over, bar the shouting. If nothing else, the events of today illustrates again how impotent Stormont remains after being down for almost 3 years. There's no sign of that changing anytime soon. Gareth Gordon, BBC Newsline, Stormont.
Outside Parliament buildings at Stormont, there were demonstrations by campaigners for and against the liberalisation of abortion. Our health correspondent Mary-Louise Connolly reports.
With Carson's statue dividing them, both sides of the abortion debate made a last-ditch attempt to make some noise. For all those involved, it has been a long and arduous road, with individuals such as this woman having to go very public with a very personal story.
I was on the other side of that statue standing with you before this landed at my door. Like I say, walk a mile in my shoes before you judge, because nobody knows how they will act until this lands at your door and you physically live through it.
This woman, who has a child with Down syndrome, says further clarity is required, but is insisting that the rights of all unborn children should be protected.
I'm reassured to a certain extent, but then termination abortion is going to be freely available up to 28 weeks with no reason given. So that worries me very much. That worries me that there's going to be so many people in this world that just aren't going to get the chance to live their lives.
Few were describing today as either a victory or a celebration. Instead, the mood was subdued. While some see today as momentous and a step forward, others are describing it as reckless, even sad. But whatever has happened here throughout today, at midnight, the law is set to change and a consultation will get underway about the future shape of abortion services in Northern Ireland. While some will see today as the end of a long process, it is actually just the start of a new chapter in Northern Ireland's abortion story. Mary-Louise Connolly, BBC Newsline.
Belfast High Court has ruled that Northern Ireland's abortion law breaches the UK's human rights commitments. The decision came as the result of a challenge taken by a woman who challenged the law after she was denied a termination in Northern Ireland and travelled to Great Britain.
As a result of a vote by a majority of Westminster MPs, abortion will cease to be a criminal offence in Northern Ireland after the 21st of October. The matter before Belfast High Court today has been working its way through Northern Ireland's legal system for a number of years. 28-year-old Sarah Ewart said she went to England for an abortion because her unborn child had no chance of survival. In Northern Ireland, under the soon-to-change laws, a termination in cases of fatal fetal abnormality is not available. Mrs Justice Keegan ruled that the applicant had been affected by Northern Ireland's current law in that she had to travel to seek an abortion in desperate circumstances.
This hasn't been an easy journey, but we've had lots of journeys back and forward through Westminster and the courts here in Stormont, so massive relief today.
Pro-life organisations had followed the High Court proceedings and were disappointed by the outcome.
This is certainly not the end of the road. We need to create safe places, places of safety for unborn children with fetal abnormality and their mothers.
Interested parties will now turn their attention to Stormont. If Northern Ireland's politicians want to influence the abortion provisions that will come into effect here, they have until October the 21st to agree a power-sharing deal. Otherwise, Westminster, through the Northern Ireland Secretary, will have the decisive role. He will decide the laws that will apply here after April the 1st next. Tommy Gorman, RTE News, Stormont.
Abortion and same-sex marriage will be legal in Northern Ireland from midnight. A last-minute bid by unionist politicians to prevent the new laws being introduced by the British government failed at Stormont because nationalist politicians thwarted efforts to have the matters debated. Let's talk to our Northern reporter now, Vincent Kearney, who's inside Stormont there. A lot of elements to this and a lot of things yet to happen in the coming hours. Vincent, can you take us through the main elements?
And Dave, well, of course, Ray, this assembly here hasn't been sitting for over 2.5 years since the collapse of the power-sharing executive. But its rules state that it must be recalled if 30 or more members sign a petition. That happened last week when 31 unionist MLAs signed a petition asking for a recall. Now, they did that because the British government said it will introduce new laws to legalise abortion and same-sex marriage in Northern Ireland unless this place is back up and running by midnight. Now, the reality is, Ray, there was never any real prospect of that happening, of devolution being restored by midnight. So unionists tried to circumvent that move by pushing through legislation in the Assembly chamber today. But the process to enable that to happen required cross-community support. That's the backing of nationalist as well as unionist politicians. And nationalist politicians, Sinn Féin and the SDLP, stopped that from happening. Members of the Northern Ireland Assembly met today for the first time in more than 1,000 days. Politicians opposed to abortion tried to introduce fast-track legislation to prevent the British government changing the law at midnight. But business could only proceed after the election of a new Speaker.
The Assembly must elect a Speaker and deputies with cross-community support as its first item of business.